I have to say I'm just really excited about being here today. I met Ben at the lunch break, and he didn't realise that he had really inspired me in the bit of research that I've done now by a talk that he gave back in 2002 at the conference in Le Havre, which made me really interested in looking at other places for bats to live apart from our houses. More about that anon. I work with the National Parks and Wildlife Service in Ireland, and that's a government agency which deals with everything to do with wildlife. Okay, so our responsibility is designating protected areas, looking after protected species. We're all law enforcement officers, so sadly I can't wait around for the field trip tomorrow because we've to be back. We're in court next week with somebody, nothing to do with bats, but we're also involved in researching. So the National Parks and Wildlife Service has several long-term bat monitoring programs, underway at the moment, and Bat Conservation Ireland, which is a volunteer group, actually runs these for the service. So I've been working with the National Parks and Wildlife Service for the last 15 years, but I've been interested in bats long before that, and arrived into the service knowing very little about Leisler's bats, to have my boss send me out to deal with a bat situation, saying, yes, I'm sending you out our expert. So most of what I've learned was learned on the hoof, in the field, running from one situation to the next. So just for those of you who don't know that much about Ireland, we're the most westerly island of Europe. And in the past week, we have produced a book on Irish bats in the 21st century. So we know we have a grand total of 9 species of bat which live in Ireland. And we have 2 more species which have turned up in the last while. Brant's bat, which we found in Glendalough in the National Park where I work. And more recently, a greater horseshoe bat. We have them called vagrants in this book because we haven't found any maternity colonies or any roosts for them. But we're hoping, that our species list might expand. So, in common with many of the talks you heard this afternoon, Irish people tend to say they love wildlife. But even those who love animals and love bats, as Grace loves bats, she even called this little bat Pippa, but she got a fright when Pippa moved very fast on her arm, okay? And this is the reaction that we get from so many householders. Now, you've already heard John's talk about houses. So a lot of my work in dealing with bats, if we leave aside the monitoring, has to do with householders, educating people, and trying to deal with the problems that arise with bats. Okay? So many people, as I say, react like Grace did there. And I have found through my work that I tend to try and emotionally blackmail householders when I go there. I talk to all the women about what good mothers bats are. That does work, And I usually bring the man of the house out to stand under the roost, and I give him my bat detector to play with. And that also works, okay? So just a few little hints for you there if you haven't thought of those ones yourselves. But what I have found over the years is that very often you think you have reached a solution with people, but a number of years later, the house is sold, as John mentioned. That's happened to me a few times. New owners in the house, problem arises again. Or people who have decided, yes, they can really cope with living with 500 pipistrelles, a few years down the line have 1,500 and just can't take it anymore. So constantly called back to the same place. And as I say, I'm 15 years working with the service, but one of the older rangers who was there long before me gave a talk in 2001, and at that he said that in the previous 15 years he had dealt with 49 problem cases of bats in his area, which was just one county. And of those, 88% of the problems were caused by pipistrelles. Okay? And in Ireland, what generally happens is people apply now for a derogation licence to exclude the bats from their house. Okay? My own experience is basically the same as his. I went looking for the statistics. So in the 2 years between 2010 and 2012, our service had 106 applications for derogation licences. These were all granted to people. Now, not everyone followed through on them. Okay? So of those 106, 3 were for brown long-eared bats, 1 was for lislers, and everything else was for pipistrelles, mostly soprano pipistrelles. Okay? When our service issues a licence, we always put in mitigation measures. And generally speaking, that means erect a bat box. Okay? But we do have some difficulties around this problem with the bat boxes. The most easily available bat box for people is an ordinary wooden bat box, like the bird box. You can buy it in any garden centre, you can buy it in any hardware store. So people seem to think that, I'll stick up one of these, it'll be fine. But, we all know that they're not suitable to replace a maternity roost. So, the roosts in houses in Ireland, generally speaking, are maternity roosts. Woodcrete boxes then are also suggested as, suitable mitigation measure. But actually being the island which is most westerly in Europe makes woodcrete boxes very difficult to obtain, strangely enough. There's no agent for them in Ireland, okay? So the agent is actually in the UK. And it can cost up to €100 to get them shipped from the UK to Ireland. So I actually had a customer at one stage who he had a soprano pipistrelle roost in the window frame, and he decided that he would hang up 5 1FF boxes in his house. He looked up the cost of them. That was going to be €100 delivery charge for those boxes. He bought 1 box. Okay, so I'm on a campaign to try and find something that will be suitable in Ireland, in Irish weather conditions, and that is not going to cost householders this price. There is no government grant in Ireland to, put up something if you get a licence like this. So this is what we need. They're an Irish solution to our weather problems. And as I said, I was really inspired back in 2002 to kind of go on this kind of a rant about bat boxes when I went to the symposium in Arv. And there was some research done at that which I suppose I took to heart. The first one there, Sophia Lorenko and friends, looked at the American maternity bat box, and she found that there was a greater range of temperatures available inside in an attic than in a bat box. That makes sense intuitively, okay? But she'd actually found that, and she had looked at where the bats were in an attic. So the bats in the attics that she examined went to the hottest part of the attic. And if I remember correctly, I am an old woman after all at this stage, she was saying that they were looking for temperatures up to 40 degrees within the attic, but when they passed 40 degrees, they moved from there, okay? The next, whoops, I have done it, of course. Yeah. Go back, point in the middle. Right. So the next bit of research there looked at different paints on boxes. So they suggested that a box that was painted grey and the front of the box covered in glass would actually be best in the kind of summer conditions of Ireland. Okay? So like an average summer's day in Ireland is about 15 degrees centigrade. We're delighted if it gets to 20 or 21 degrees. Okay? So, conditions are quite damp in Irish summers, really. Then also in Galway, Susan Swift from Scotland talked about a heated bat box that they were experimenting with, which might, provide the conditions suitable for pipistrelles to roost in. And it's only this year that I've seen a heated bat box come on the market commercially. And it works out when you put the VAT on it and everything else at somewhere between 900 and €1,000 for this box. So again, it's not something that's feasible to ask a householder to buy for themselves. Oh, no, go the right way. Okay, so what did I do? I decided that I would collect the boxes that were readily available in Ireland and have a look at them and see how they worked. So I got a 2FN box with 1 chamber, the 1FD, which has 2 chambers, the 1FF box, which was the one that was most frequently recommended in Ireland for pipistrelles and for brown long-eared bats, the standard timber box that's available everywhere. And I also got a box made by a company in Ireland called Bat Roost. It's based on the American maternity roost, but this particular box was designed slightly differently. So in the roof of the box up here, there's a chamber put in that the bats can't access, and it's filled with sand. And then inside in the sand is a piece of copper pipe. So the idea was that the heat coming down on the top of the box would heat up the copper pipe, and the heat would transfer into the sand, and then it would be slowly released. Okay? So otherwise it's the same as the American box, but there are no side vents on it. We didn't think that it would get too hot inside the box. Okay? So then I fitted each of the boxes with a data logger. And this is one of these Gemini data loggers, which did temperature and humidity. So I actually checked both of those. And I placed all the boxes on the wall of a cottage which has a soprano pipistrelle roost in the attic. Okay. So this building is actually in the national park where I work. It's an information office for the public. So the pipistrelle roost very often is in this part of the attic here. The red arrows show you just some of the entry points into the attic. And we have a camera up in the attic as well with a big flat-screened television down in the place where the public can come in. So our bat cam is on for the whole of the summer, and people can watch the bats creeping around, and it's very exciting the day the first baby bat is seen. And we had an even more exciting moment when somebody saw a rat looking into the camera one day. So we had to take urgent steps about that. So you can see there where the boxes were placed on the wall. I actually meant to put wire on the entrances to the boxes to prevent any bats going into them during the experiment, because I didn't want the bats to raise the temperature within the thing. But anyway, they were hung up before I did that. It didn't make any difference. No bat even tried to go into the boxes for the summer. Okay. Inside in the attic, I put 2 data loggers, one at the entrance where the bats came in, and one over where the roost was. Now, the bats inside in the attic went in under the insulation. Again, I didn't want the logger to be with the bats because I reckoned their body temperature would change the temperature. I wanted to find out what the attic itself was like. And then I placed another logger on this windowsill here to pick up the ambient temperature outside. So this face of the building is facing kind of west. Okay? Out of the picture to this side is an old oak woodland, and about 300 meters away from it is a big lake. Okay. So, okay. All of the boxes were fixed. My intention was to have them there for the whole of the maternity season. So the five smaller boxes were placed there in May, but unfortunately I had to wait for the big wooden box to be made, so that didn't come until July. So from the 17th of July to the 28th of August, we monitored the boxes. Now, you'll be amazed at my intelligence here, but I discovered that it was warmer in the attic than it was outside. Okay. Obviously, that makes sense. And this particular summer in Ireland was a bad summer. It was wet, it was windy. Even when the temperatures were relatively warm, it was cloudy. So we didn't have a lot of direct sunshine for that particular summer. Okay. The internal range in the attic was from almost 11 degrees up to 40 degrees inside in the attic. Okay. But what I have used for the graphs here, I've used the mean temperature, because obviously the temperature fluctuated every day. Okay? So I just took the mean for each day to help me compare them. So the mean temperature inside the attic was 20 degrees, and outside was 17. But there was obviously quite a fluctuation within that. Okay? So you'll see there the window is the dark blue one, that's outside, and then the other two are the two in the attic. Okay, so then I compared the different boxes with the temperatures outside. And really, to sum it up, rather than going through lots of scary graphs, basically the boxes, the woodcrete boxes, were roughly the same as the temperature outside. So they just mirrored the ambient temperature. They weren't any better on their own than being outdoors, is really what came out of that. There's just a very slight difference there. The wooden boxes, you can see there, were actually a little bit cooler than the temperature outside. Okay? So window means the one taking the ambient temperature. So they actually came out as being slightly cooler. Then when you compare them with the attic, what you can see really, the dark blue line at the top is the attic temperatures, and all of the bat boxes were lower in temperature than it was in the attic. Okay. I suppose I was surprised at that, because anything I'd read or heard from before was probably from a warmer country than Ireland. But it would seem that when the sun shone on bat boxes, they got too hot for bats. And this was not what I really found here. Okay, in this area. I decided then I would look and see, was woodcrete any better than timber, or was timber better than woodcrete? So comparing the woodcrete boxes with the attic, again, you can see they're lower. There's a slight difference, obviously, between each of the three boxes. But to be honest, those differences were very slight, you know, when we looked at them. And the timber boxes, again, there was a slight difference between them. So the yellow line there, which was the bat roost box, that's the one with the sand and the pipe inside of it, was doing slightly better in terms of temperature than the ordinary wooden box. Okay. Now, when I put those two together, so the best of the woodcrete boxes and the best of the timber boxes, to look at them, you can see that the woodcrete box is actually doing slightly better. But remember, I said these are the mean temperatures for the day, so it hides the fluctuations in them. And I did find a difference between the two types of box. The wooden box with its pipe and its sand, while it was much slower to heat up during the day, stayed warmer at night. Okay, so it was slower to release its heat as well. And obviously the question that I have then about that is, why do bats choose their roost? Are they trying to keep pups warm at night when the mothers have flown out? So do they want it to be hot at night, or are they looking for the warm temperatures during the day? I suspect that they're looking for the warm temperatures at night when they're gone and the pups are left on their own. So obviously then a box that would release its temperature more slowly might be a better box than the other one. Is Ben going to wave at me? He is, yes, 5 minutes. We're nearly there. The other thing that really excited me about coming here was when I was given the link to your last conference, I had a look at that, and I saw a talk about using these American wooden boxes in Norway. And the temperatures in those boxes seemed to be very, very high. Again, it struck me because it was quite different to what I had found. And then at the very end of the talk, the speaker said that there was almost 24 hours daylight in Norway at that time of the year. Okay? Even though we have very long days in the summer, we certainly didn't have sunshine that particular summer. Okay? So looking then very quickly, I also looked at humidity. So I'm just going to kind of scoot through these very quickly. The attic roost is the yellow one here, and as expected, it's also drier as well as warmer than the boxes, okay? So all the boxes are above the yellow line there, so the roost was drier. And the different woodcrete boxes also had a different amount of dampness. So again, the attic is the bottom one, but the 1FD and the 2FN boxes were actually a lot damper than the 1FF. Part of that may be because in one of those there was very little space to put the data logger in, so the data logger may have been too close to the entrance, but both of the boxes were significantly damper. The wooden boxes were also damper than the attic roost. What was interesting here is the dark blue line is the one with the sand in it, the big American box with the sand. That was damper. So I suspect that what was happening there was that while the sand was holding the temperature and holding the heat and releasing it slowly, it was also holding moisture into the box, you know, so. And then, so if that's just the two of them together, so the wooden box and the woodcrete box versus the attic. And again, if you look at those in terms of the humidity, again, the woodcrete box is coming out on top. Okay. So, which is the best bat box? Well, one always has to do some statistics on it, don't you? And I just really believe in this statement. It means never having to say you're certain. You can say with 95% accuracy or something like that, but you don't have to be exactly certain. And I'm never certain when I do statistics, okay? But I did a Z test on them, and I found basically that with temperature and with relative humidity, there was a significant difference between the conditions in the bat boxes and the conditions inside in the attic. So my sense is that neither type of box was ever going to really match the conditions that the bats had in the attic. And so it's not a great surprise that although there are bat box schemes throughout Ireland, we have yet to find any being used as a maternity roost. There's only one box used as a maternity roost, and that is actually the bat box, the big black box, without the sand and the pipe in the top of it. But so much like all the other researchers here, it took about 5 years before the bats moved into that, and they had been excluded from the house in which that box was, you know, nailed to the wall outside. They disappeared for a few years and eventually came back to that box. My own sense is that the bats are sometimes saying, you know, we have to use suboptimal conditions if where we really want to be is not available to us anymore. Okay, various references there. Lots of people to thank: the people that sponsored it, the people that hung up the boxes, the people that kept me on track and helped me do my ordinary work while I was messing around with bat boxes as well. And I just want to say thanks to you again for inviting me. Okay.
Thank you, Enda. We have time for a few questions. Are there any questions?
I'm curious in how you will continue having these results.
Yeah. The boxes are still there. And amazingly, no bat has used them since. So they were put up in 2012. Okay, we haven't used them. I suppose one of the things I would like to do would be look at other types of boxes. I did ask a builder friend to start experimenting with different kinds of building materials. So for two reasons. One, to see where there are materials that maybe had better insulation qualities, or, you know, now from listening this morning, you know, do we really want a bat box that's going to be that wide and what was it, 170 kilos heavy or something, you know? We've enough difficulty getting people to put these boxes up on houses. The other thing then that I want to do is to try and kind of look in other types of Irish summers as well, to see whether there's any difference. That was a particularly bad summer. But unfortunately, we didn't have time to continue the project immediately, but we may get going again. Yeah. Thanks.
Any other question? Erik?
I am very curious about the license that you mentioned for exclusion of bats when when there's a domestic problem, or how do you call it? Does there has to be proof of really that they are really problems like smell or droppings, or is a fear or an attitude like I am in charge of what is living in my house? Is that also enough to get a license?
Technically, yes, it is enough. But the way it works is if somebody rings up saying they've bats and it's a problem, a ranger like myself will go out. And I will usually spend at least 3 hours with the people. I'll do a lot of talking to them, a lot of listening to see what the problem actually is. So sometimes I can solve the problem for people. What I have found, though, is that if people are happy to live with their bats, maybe a few years later something changes and they're not so happy then. The second reason that I'm there is also to assess what species it is. Because obviously I did come across one house that had natterers in it, for example. Those people did not want their bats excluded, but their cat was actually able to catch all the bats, just the way the house was designed. So I worked with them to try and find a way of excluding the bats from the living space of the house. They were happy enough to keep them in the attic. On our form, fear and smell, and I can't remember, the third thing is, I'm not saying it correctly, but something like psychological distress or something like that is on it. The householder themselves must tick which the problem is. There's also an issue about a danger to the bats themselves. So, for example, in that natterer's case, that was dangerous for the bats to be getting into the living space. I used to find that about 80% of the people I visited never followed through to get a license. Okay? So about 80% of them decided they would keep their bats. Once they understood them, understood that there were no diseases involved and things like that, they were happy enough. But as I say, down the line, it can be a problem. And I visited the same small village 3 times in 9 years to do 3 different exclusions for a colony of about 250 pipistrelles. So I'm certain that that was the same colony of pipistrelles, just being excluded from different houses in the same village during that 9-year period. And that's what my concern is, that down the line, when they run out of houses, what happens to them? We really need to find something that works and that will work in our wet, cold climate.
Thank you.